Anna Serin, Director of Listings Development with the Canadian Securities Exchange, and you're joining us for another market recap. I am joined by my co-host, Bruce Campbell with StoneCastle Investment Management. Thank you for joining me, Bruce.
Yeah, here we are for another week.
Another week, here we are. Okay, there's a bunch of stuff to talk about today, so let's dive into it. We're going to talk about a little amnesia we're seeing in the markets. You mentioned that we're seeing different sentiment every day, so we're going to touch on that. There is some proposed new capital taxes that are being proposed in the U.S. by Mr. Biden. So we'll see how that is going to affect the markets. The SAFE Act has gone and passed the House yet again. We're going to talk about what that means, what has to happen next, and what that means for cannabis companies. And then we're going to talk about Netflix. There was some movement in the stock this week. There was lots going on there. We'll talk about that. We celebrated Earth Day yesterday at the CSC, and we had a nice synopsis of companies that joined us. We'll talk about that, and we'll finish off with a little bit about Bitcoin. So let's start talking about market amnesia. What happened?
Yeah, just this has been a trend over the last a couple of weeks here now. The market really doesn't have much memory day to day. You see it, up 1%, down 1%, which is is not really typical. Usually it trades around a much closer range and has a trend as well to it. So it's just something that we keep an eye on with volatility and where things might head. So
we'll see if that continues on. I guess that's tough for speculators. If they can't really predict sentiment, it's tough on them.
Well, allegedly the day traders love it because they can, buy and sell as the market moves around. I don't know if that's really what happens when it comes down to execution, but that's the theory at least.
Interesting. Okay, there was a proposition of a capital gains tax in the U.S. Tell us what happened.
Yeah, so the Biden administration, I guess they've had this up on their website for quite some time, but it was kind of more put formally to the press on yesterday. And when that happened, the market sold off quite dramatically. If you sort of look at when it was released and kind of when it came out, almost the split second that it came out, the market dropped immediately. And what's proposal is to take the tax rate up from, I think it's around 23 or 24% now to 43% on capital gains. So it's still below the rate where we pay, but obviously that would have a huge impact. And, now there's lots of speculation onto whether or not that would be, retroactive from a certain date or not. And, so when that happens, obviously it spooks the market. And that's exactly why we saw the sell-off yesterday.
So I'm curious about your thoughts on this, Bruce. I was reading up on it a little bit, and I'm just curious, first of all, if people get to a place where they use their after income tax, their tax dollars after, or their income after tax, and they go and they put it into an investment and they make capital gains on it, do you believe that it's fair to discourage people to invest their money or to invest in real estate or whatever it is that you're getting your capital gains on? What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, so now we're getting into politics, are we? Okay. Well, I mean, personally, I'd rather not pay capital gains tax, but unfortunately we have to. I mean, it's one of those things that they've decided to do, so, they obviously, it's directed to the wealthy, right? I mean, the wealthy are the ones who typically are investing in stocks and securities versus, home ownership typically doesn't have any capital gains because, it's kind of more the investment of the masses, right? So obviously the people that, have the money and are making the capital gains, can't really complain too much because they are making money, but certainly it would be a nicer world if we did not have to pay those taxes.
Well, and I guess you also in the U.S., you have the same option here with your tax-free havens, like a 401k down in the U.S., which is RSPs up in Canada. We also have TFSAs. So there is opportunity to be able to invest without tax consequence. I was reading an interesting article. It was talking about the fact that we're going to see at the end of the year what they're calling bed and breakfast investing. And what they're saying is because this tax might be imposed next year, that people are going to crystallize their capital gains this year and then buy the stock the next day. So they'll sell, crystallize the gains so that they can pay this year's capital gains tax on it, buy the stock back, and then suffer the consequences next year on the upside from there, if there is any. So they said it'll be interesting to see if that actually occurs and what'll happen in the market, because there'll be a bunch of buying and selling, but all within the same stock that they hold.
Yeah, and I mean, you see that now in the markets, right? When you're rolling up to sort of the last transaction day for the year. A lot of the tax loss selling isn't done on the very last day, but certainly that period from probably the middle of November to the middle of December is the heaviest. And what you tend to see is stocks that have been weak for the year tend to get sold down. And then those same stocks come January, or come, even the, in the week between Christmas and New Year's, when the settlement is now into January, you start to see those stocks move up. And there's, strategies where people will actually buy those stocks that have been, sort of beaten down the most during tax loss selling into January, and then they'll sell them after a certain period of time because they make a move.
Wow, crazy. The SAFE Act. So we're talking about the SAFE Act again. What happened this week?
Yeah, so it moved through Congress this week. And this is the financial banking bill for cannabis companies in the US. So it will allow them to have, more access to banks. Right now, if you're a federally registered bank, you can't deal with a cannabis company because it's still federally illegal to be in the cannabis business. This would allow them to have more access to banking. And of course, what's happened is that, in a lot of places, cash is still used. And, the regulators are concerned that there can be money laundering done with all this cash that's floating around. And so, eventually this probably gets done. It's obviously through Congress now. It's handed off to Senate, and the Senate, what they've said is that Biden is still studying it. So they're going to take a little bit of time with this before they actually get it through. But if they were to pass it, then, obviously it moves to his desk to be signed off on. And then at that point in time, it gives, a significant advantage to some of these cannabis companies, because now they'll probably have more access to funds. They can certainly bank a lot easier, but they could also probably access cheaper forms of debt financing through banks, because it wouldn't be illegal for those banks to deal with them anymore.
I guess they wouldn't have to go the equity route. So if they wanted to go the leveraging route, then they can go through that. One thought I had about that, and I was just curious what your thoughts on this were. This might be a really big opportunity for banks out there, because they get to participate in what's become such a massive industry, with the ability to, profit and monetize off of it. Do you think the banks will really benefit from this?
Well, if you look at the projections of how big the industry is going to be, over the next 10 years, the industry is going to be massive. And if you just think that, just one way that the banks can get access to this industry is through loans, but they get, all kinds of other services that happen beyond just the loans, then yeah, they want to get their foot in the door too as well. Right now, they've shied away just because of the, all the restrictions, but something that, I'm sure they're looking at, and, they want to see happen so that they can get in there and not have to worry about regulators.
They want a piece of that pie.
Yeah.
Okay, Netflix. It was an interesting week for the stock Netflix. It had a drop after its results came out for subscribers. There was a drop in subscribers. What did we see happen with the stock?
Yeah, so the earnings, they actually beat on their earnings, and their revenue number was strong. But everybody, of course, looks at their subscriber growth, because this is, a high multiple stock. It's one that, is a big part of, obviously the FANG complex. And so, people are always watching it. And so they came out with better numbers than they had. But what people were looking at was the fact that they had 4 million new subscribers for the quarter. And you compare that to a quarter a year ago when they had 16 million. And of course, the comparisons now for them for the next year are going to be pretty tough, because, all of us were locked in our homes worldwide, probably trying to figure out how to entertain ourselves and our family. And so, the Netflix subscription seemed like a pretty good opportunity. And now, they have to compete with the fact that, a year ago they added 16 million, and this year on the same quarter they only added 4 million. It's going to be tough going forward for them, and we'll see how kind of the market looks at that. The stock sold off overnight, and it sort of bounced around since then.
Well, I looked it up. So they currently have 207.6 million subscribers. So one of my thoughts was how could they keep at that pace? At some point, you run out of people to subscribe. Their revenues definitely went up, and I know that because I got my notice over the year that my rates were increasing. So I would imagine, and it goes up enough that you would imagine that's huge revenue increase for them. And a big part of the increase that happened last year, which I thought was interesting, was China. So it'll be interesting to see if that carries on in Asia or if it was a blip just because of the pandemic. Obviously, we also have a lot of competitors now. There's Disney and Crave and Prime, and I know that I pay for all of them. So you're welcome, all of you. One thing that was interesting is the fall was, I just thought this was an interesting number for people to think about. It fell that first day 11%, which is $25 billion in market cap. That's just how big these companies are. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, the amount of capital or wealth that they can create or destroy in a day, when you just look at it and say, oh, the stock was up or down this percentage, but when you look at the dollar amount that is, it can be massive.
It can be massive. Yeah. And I think the stock's trading around 500 a share. It'll be interesting to see what happens for them over the next year. I guess the other problem is they said, we didn't have as much content as we'd hoped because of the pandemic. We couldn't create, the original content. The one thing I love is I'm starting to see some really old stuff come, and I'm a bit of a geek that way. So I'm happy to see the old stuff still coming, and all the Brit stuff is coming, which is great. So we'll see what happens with poor little old Netflix. Yesterday we celebrated Earth Day. And the CSE did a forum. We represented a bunch of companies. We had someone from Earth Renew Inc., Musgrow Biologics Corp., B Vectoring Technologies Inc., Shark International Systems, and Input Capital Corp. So that is on our CSE TV. Go check it out. Bruce, what do you think do you think there's a big trend and a movement when investors come to the market? Do you think ESG requirements, are something that's important to the investor coming to the market today?
I sure do. In the last few years, if you go back 5 years ago, probably most people didn't know what ESG stood for. Now, people hear it, they see it, and, there's, separate, complete and total research companies that just strictly screen for ESG and how ESG scores ranked for each individual company. So it's certainly more important to individual investors and institutional investors. And where that sort of trickles down into the stock price is that, if you just think about stocks as commodity and it's, supply and demand, if everybody wants to buy the best companies because they're more, ESG friendly, or, they have a higher governance score, then, that's going to drive demand for that stock and push the stock price up, probably trade at a higher multiple. So it is important. You see most corporate presentations nowadays, they have a slide on their ESG strategy and typically on their website as well. So it's a trend that's probably not going to go away anytime soon. And obviously there's some industries that, it's easier for them to, promote the fact that they're, have a high ESG score than others. That being said, you still see, some companies in specific industries, like say the oil and gas industry, that, have done a lot and really try to promote, what they're doing for ESG, even in, a difficult industry for that.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing too, there's funds out there that will focus specifically just on that. But I'm happy to hear that maybe some of those stocks traded a bit of a premium because ESG requirements are expensive. Yeah,
for sure. And that's where everybody wants to be, so that their stock does get, kind of more eyeballs on it because it goes through all these ranks and screens.
Absolutely. Okay, some stuff happened with Bitcoin. It's not a week unless we talk about Bitcoin, Bruce. So what happened with Bitcoin this week?
That's right. Yeah. So, Bitcoin closed below the $50,000 mark, or I guess it's trading below the $50,000 mark right now. And, it's also below the 50-day moving average, which is the first time we've seen this in quite some time now. And, we track a lot of different tools here at StoneCastle. And one of the ones that we follow is something called a relative rotation graph. And there's really 4 quadrants to this. And it just shows you the momentum of individual securities. And in this case, you can see, where Bitcoin has been losing its momentum. Even though the price has been going higher, it's been losing its momentum and is now in the weakening quadrant, which is interesting because, you can still have fairly strong price performance in when it enters the weakening quadrant, but then it tends to slow down. So one of those things that we're watching, we're not direct investors in Bitcoin, but we certainly have investments in some of the companies that operate in that sector or have positions in Bitcoin. And if you think about something like Tesla, which has announced that they have a huge Bitcoin position, or a large Bitcoin position, then that's obviously going to affect their stock price as well. If you see a sell-off in Bitcoin where it drops below 50 and maybe goes to 40 or 30, right?
It's crazy. And I mean, so using Tesla as an example, because they've bought so much, literally their holding can fluctuate so dramatically. And that's just their cash reserve or their, crypto reserve. So it's interesting that people are hedging bets, on this currency the way they are.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously it's new as well. So it tends to be fairly volatile, both on the upside and the downside.
Crazy. What should we think about going into next week, Bruce?
Well, I mean, one of the things, it's been a kind of a theme the last few weeks, but we've been really keeping our eye on gold here. And, the fact that gold continues to just kind of inch along and strengthen up, and the gold stocks themselves have also been doing the same thing. So that's one of the trends that we're watching here with our, both with our research and with our portfolio.
Awesome. I also wanted to mention that next week, the CSC is launching the Cannabis Investor Series. Promo reel can be found on CSC TV, and we will make sure that we provide you with the details to register. Bruce is going to be joining me every week for our market recap throughout the month that we'll be doing the Cannabis Investor Series, and we'll be diving into some of the topics of that week. Every week has a different theme. I think in the cannabis space nowadays, we could probably do this for a whole quarter. But we're going to try and fit it all into a month. We have some amazing speakers that are joining us, some real thought leaders in the space. We're very excited about it. Make sure you register, and then we can make sure we send you all the stuff. But Bruce, you and I are going to break down every week the theme of that week and what we talked about. So definitely make sure that you stay tuned. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And thank you, Bruce.
Yeah, have a great weekend.
You too.